I did it, guys. I put 5 days of work into my amazing, glorious Charles beard mustache just for this video. Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Armin, and all jokes aside about the neck beard, we really are going to be jumping into floor 95 today with Charles. All in all, a pretty reasonable floor, pretty cool mechanics, and we'll explain those here in a second. But today we get to fight Charles as well as Diane, Basque, Corvus, and Crow. So before we get started, let's jump into the team makeup to do the floor. So to kick us off here for healers, I decided to go with Achates for this fight. It is a green boss, and even though in phase 2 and 3 of his of the Charles phase of the fight, you do end up getting some water units and some fire units, I did think that Achates was pretty solid here because you don't have to use the S1 to put on debuffs, as well as you can also just cycle back and forth between the S3 and the S2 to get rid of debuffs on your team, as well as just heal cycle. So if you got a Rod of Amaryllis, solid healer here. Another option would also be Angelic Montmorency, because as much as the elemental advantage matters for the boss, it's not super huge, especially when you consider that it's sort of a hodgepodge of different elements throughout the phase. For damage dealers, I actually chose Yufine, and honestly the reason I went with her is because on her S2, her silence can't affect the boss, so you're getting the ability to give herself attack buff and speed buff pretty regularly without it actually affecting the boss. Also AoEing the all of the extra mobs that get kind of brought into that particular phase with Charles. So super nice. Has a defense break on the S1, that's huge, and then generally just pretty large damage on her S3 made her a pretty easy pick for this particular fight. The second DPS that I chose ended up being Seaside Bologna. Obviously, you have the water disadvantage against Charles. However, with the amount of things that are going to be hitting you and AoEing your team, between Corvus hitting you a ton, as well as Crow and Basque and Diane and Charles at the same time hitting a lot of different characters depending on what skill he's using, SSB is just a solid retaliation defense breaking bot. So between her S1 giving target debuff and then the defense break on the S2, you just basically don't use the S3 at any point, and you'll have lots of retaliation damage, lots of single target damage, and just ends up being a really great choice when trying to manage through all of those adds in this fight. This particular fight does require a large chunk of AoE because there's so many mobs in the phase. So Yufine worked for me and SSB worked for me. Other great choices when I went through this the first time, I ended up using Seaside Bologna and regular Bologna, because regular Bologna also does really chunky single target damage, but also has defense break very regularly between her S3 and then her procced S3s on her S1. So a lot of great options here. I would say anything that has really solid AoE and isn't going to overly debuff the boss is perfect for you. Now knowing what we have for a DPS composition, it's going to make more sense now why I chose Green Armin as the tank for this particular comp. Number one, again, elemental. It's going to sit fine, grass versus grass, tree versus tree, whatever you want to call it, as well as most of the mobs that are added in are actually water, so you have an elemental advantage most of the time, except for against Fire Corvus. This particular tank in Green Armin is amazing because not only can she hold Arius, which you would need in any tank that you brought in here, but the cool thing with having an SSB who's constantly cycling AoE defense breaks on all of these targets is that you actually have the ability to lock down a target every time it's Green Armin's turn, not to mention the general extra tankiness you get by using Green Armin's S3. You actually have the ability to just stun things on the S1 pretty darn consistently, especially with the exclusive equipment added. So I went with Green Armin. You'll see it comes not necessarily clutch, but it definitely adds an element of like, this just makes this way more consistent because I can actually lock down targets that I wasn't able to before. Other tanks that would be super usable for this, I would think that Lilius would be just fine. I would think that most other tanks, honestly, would be perfectly acceptable here. Biggest thing that you don't want to have on a tank is a debuff on your S1. So being that the boss is not tauntable, you're okay if the debuff is taunt. So now that we're done with the team makeup, let's take a look at the fight. So as we jump into the fight, you'll notice right off the bat, this particular group of mobs, from the poison nagas to all of the fire nagas that you might see on like a wyvern run. Not a lot going on here. In fact, you kind of blast them down super fast using just SSB. So Phase 1 is merely just killing it through ASAP. You can probably put it on auto, and yeah, just start saving up as many souls as you can for Phase 2. So now in Phase 2, we're going to see Charles. Charles, you're going to get one quick round off with all of your characters first, and then Charles is going to take his first S3. So, things that Charles' S3 does. It attacks all enemies, activating different effects according to the number of times he has been using it. So, for the first time, he will actually summon Diene and Basque to join him. He'll dispel all the debuffs from him, and then add a barrier, a very large barrier for 2 turns. Second time, he'll summon Crow and Fire Corvus before doing the exact same thing again, and then any time beyond a third time, he will actually decrease defense for 2 turns on your team before increasing the attack of the caster. So, you would think that he would have like an attack buff that you can dispel. Not actually the case. Every time after the third, he's going to continue to ramp up and get stronger and stronger and stronger. So, this boss is a DPS check. The idea is how fast can you get rid of all of the extra mobs, and then how fast can you then finish off Charles. So, a couple of other things that you should know about him. You cannot get more than 2 debuffs on him. If the caster has 3 or more debuffs when somebody's turn ends, it'll dispel all the debuffs from the caster and reset the cooldown on Faithful Strike. Faithful Strike is the S3, so he's just going to continue to ramp up and get more and more powerful if you don't keep those debuffs down to 2. So in our team, the way that we did that is we noticed that Silence is not actually a debuff that can hit Charles, so you're pretty safe to use the S2 on Yufine. And then the 2 debuffs that we want to hit are Target debuff and Defense down. Both of those 2 things can be found from your SSB as long as you don't use SSB's third skill. So going into the fight and how this works, so you're going to notice right off the bat, he ends up getting Basque and Diene. The kill order for these that I chose to do was to kill Diene first, because Diene actually heals everybody, whereas Basque only just buffs everybody. And so, to be quite honest, based on the fact that we had Green Armin and we were able to pretty much just lock down Basque so that Basque couldn't actually do that to anybody, couldn't actually end up buffing anyone, it basically made it so that we could just take out Diene and focus that really, really hard. As soon as Diene was done, we ended up finishing off Basque and then working on Fire Corvus and Crow. So with Fire Corvus and Crow, it does become a little bit harder to be able to lock down Corvus, because he's the only one that really has a real ability that's tough and difficult to deal with here, and that's because he does an AoE taunt on your team. And since you do have a lot of grass units here, it ends up landing a lot. Thankfully, with Achates and having her effect resist buff up every other turn, I was able to pretty much just dodge out of that. It wasn't too big of a deal, and then she could then dispel everybody with her S3. So not that big of a deal, but if you were to get unlucky and the Achates does get hit, and or you just kind of happen to get hit anyways, there could be a little bit of RNG there, but for the most part, the only other real way out of that would be to have something else that had effect resist or immunity that would just not get hit by the Fire Corvus. All in all, not terribly bad. You'll be able to heal yourself back up and you'll be set. Once you've then killed the Crow and the Fire Corvus, kind of in whichever order is easiest for your particular team, I would say you can kind of jump directly onto Charles. Again, with Charles, make sure not to go over 2 debuffs and finish him off as fast as you possibly can, because every single time he uses Faithless Strike, it increases the speed after the second time, and it also increases the attack every time an ally dies. So keep that in mind when his adds, like the additional Basque, Diene, Corvus, and Crow join. Every time one of them dies, your Charles is going to get stronger and stronger. So you're racing the clock on both damage and speed, because if you don't actually finish him off quickly, the damage will become overwhelming and you will actually die. So kind of a gear check, but all in all, a relatively straightforward fight. It's just a matter of killing off the ads in a proper order that's going to get them down quickly, and then busting down the Charles as fast as you possibly can.
I'm better off now without you. I'm not some toy that you can use. And when you come back, I'll refuse. 'Cause I'm better off now, better off now. I'm better off now without you. I'm not some toy that you can use. And when you come back, I'll refuse. 'Cause I'm better off now, better off now. I'm better off now without you. I'm not some toy that you can use. And when you come back, I'll refuse. 'Cause I'm better off now, better off now.
So that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching Abyss Floor 95. If you guys had any other questions about any other Abyss floors, everything from here forward we have on the channel. So make sure you guys take a look at those. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe on all the stuff that we're putting out. And we can't wait to see you guys in the next video. Peace out, guys.